Dad.
What?
Dad.
What?
Dad.
What?
Head to the fireplace.
We don't have a fireplace.
Oh.
So Lainey got to see her first Indiana Jones movie this weekend. And what was very cool about it is she'd never seen an Indiana Jones film before, and she got to see her first Indiana Jones film in the movie theater on the big screen because they did a Saturday night rewind of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, and we went to it. Now, it was a really late showing, so Colton couldn't go, but we went, and this worked out perfect because of all the Indiana Jones films. This one, I feel Lainey could see with some minor censoring by me, and possibly the Crystal Skull episode she could see. Raiders and Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom have a little, there's too many scenes with intensity in it for her and a little too graphic here and there. And of course, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is known for the fact that after its release, the PG-13 rating was created because of that, the heavy adult situations in the film as far as graphic violence and intensity go. So she hasn't seen those. But on the way to the movie, I prefaced Indiana Jones and the character and basics about Raiders of the Lost Ark for her so that she would have some reference points in order to see this film and understand what was going on. She's also had the opportunity to see the Indiana Jones Stunt Spectacular at Disney World in Florida a couple times, so I could also reference pieces of that as far as her basis of knowledge for the films. So we went to see this, and you've always liked the character of Indiana Jones, and I notice you're in your Indiana Jones version of his outfit today. That's great. You've always liked the character of Indiana Jones prior to seeing the films. Now, why was that? Why do you like that character?
I think he's really brave and adventurous, and that's what most people would probably think, but it's kind of cool to see him, like, he was a boy in the first part of the film.
Okay, so you're talking you're going right into Last Crusade. I was just wondering about, prior to seeing this film, you've always liked Indiana Jones, and you've always wanted to see Indiana Jones. And why was that? Why have you always wanted to see it?
I knew that he was adventurous and stuff, and you've told me things about him, just not any spoilers.
Right.
So I thought it was kind of interesting.
Okay, and I did make the case for, I do believe, and this is my personal take on it anyway, that the MacGyver TV series that Lainey likes so much from the 1980s, I think is a direct result of the success of the Indiana Jones films and the James Bond films. MacGyver is a combination of Indiana Jones and James Bond for TV. And just like I think I used this reference before when we talked about MacGyver, you know, Three Men and a Little Lady was a popular movie, and then the TV series Full House, of course, capitalized on that. I think MacGyver comes out of Indiana Jones and James Bond. So you have that sense of who he was going to be a little bit about him, what have you. Okay, so let's go right to The Last Crusade. Now, this is really cool for me because the first time you got to see an Indiana Jones film, you saw this film the same way I did in the movie theater on the big screen. What did you think about it?
I really liked it, and I liked how he was brave to start with when he was a boy.
Okay.
And I like how you can see how he's afraid of snakes and stuff like that.
Right, so the opening of this film, I told you, Indiana Jones films always start out with an opening, and that opening is usually the end of an adventure that we haven't seen. It's in the MacGyver TV shows, the first season at least, start out the same way. The opening gambit, they used to call it, which is like the cold openings or the lunch bits that we do here, right? The opening gambit, they used to call it, was basically the end of a previous adventure that we never saw. And so Indiana Jones films start out the same way. This one, was the third one, and at the time it was going to be the last of the Indiana Jones series. So they decided to kind of go into his backstory a little bit and give us some answers as to why certain things existed. So we find out how he got the scar on his chin, why he's actually afraid of snakes, and it also sets up like why he kind of dresses the way he does. And it sets up the situation with his dad, because his dad's going to become a prominent character in the actual rest of the story, the film that we're going to see. Go ahead.
And about how he dresses up, that's the part where I got a little bit confused. Like, why does he dress up as the bad guy?
Okay, and you're talking about in the opening segment of the film when
Yeah.
River Phoenix is playing Indiana Jones as a young boy. He goes and he sees these guys who are digging for the treasure in the mountains, because he's with the Boy Scout troop. Indy's with the Boy Scout troop that day. He goes into the cave and he sees these men digging, and they find the Cross of Cortez. And he says, oh, that should be in a museum. And he goes down and he takes, without them knowing it, he takes the cross and he's going to steal it to give to the museum, because he feels they're taking it and it belongs in a museum. And of course, he just as Indy always does, he makes a noise as he's leaving by accident, and they see him and they start chasing him. And the head, what you're calling a bad guy, but the head of that crew is dressed with a fedora, a leather jacket, very much the look of Indiana Jones. He looks like Indy does later. And when Indy gets away at first, when he's running away, and then he gets to the circus train, and he gets on the circus train, and all the things happen in there. And if you haven't seen the film, I don't want to go into the spoilers, but when all that happens, and he goes into the magic car, and he actually finds his way away, that man who looks like Indy goes to the back of the train, and he's watching Indy run, and he kind of smiles. He smiles a little bit because, and you asked me why is he smiling? And I said because he admires Indy for having for being brave and getting away with what he's gotten away with thus far. So he admires him. And so Indy goes back to his house and he wants to tell his father, you know, I've got the cross and what have you, what's happened. And the father's not paying attention to him. And then the sheriff shows up and actually takes the cross from Indy and gives it to the man with the fedora and everything, so they get it. And the man goes to Indy and he says, you lost today, kid. That doesn't mean you have to like it. And he takes the fedora off his head and he puts it on Indy. And it's basically because he admires Indy, and then Indy dresses like him later. I think because in a way, he admires that man in a way that, because he had an interaction with that man in a way that he never had with his own father. That becomes kind of a hero. And I guess we could liken that to like, my dad was a hero of mine, but also like I liked Han Solo from the Star Wars films or different things. So we tend to emulate our heroes a little bit and do things. So that's kind of why. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So he had even though that man was only briefly associated with him, he made an impression on him, and he connected with that man in a way that he couldn't connect with his dad. Didn't mean he didn't love his dad. He loved his dad. And that shows throughout the course of this film. You know, they repair their relationship basically through the course of this film. But he and his father didn't get along very well, and this man and he had a connection at that point. So that was a hero for him. So we get all those answers in the beginning of the film, and then it's a great moment. You know, Spielberg and Lucas do a wonderful job. You know, the man puts the fedora on Indy's head. Indy's head is down as River Phoenix is playing him. And then when the head comes up, it's Harrison Ford now as Indy, and it's later in the story carries on from there. Okay, so what were your impressions of this film? What did you take away from the film? What did you like, dislike?
I really liked how there were surprises. Like, I thought that it would be something, and then it would be something like really different from that. So it was fun in the story.
Right, so the story kept taking twists and turns that you didn't expect. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. I'll tell you that when these films came out, of course, Raiders, when it came out, I didn't know what to expect. I didn't understand what it was going to be. And so when I went to that film, I was hugely and pleasantly surprised. I just loved it, and it was a wonderful film. When Temple of Doom came out, which is actually a prequel that takes place in the timeline prior to Raiders, the first time I saw it, I don't know that I liked it. I didn't understand parts of it, and it was a little intense and what have you. But subsequently, that became I like that one as much as I like Raiders, and I'm in the minority there. Most people do not. That's the film that's their least favorite of the original three. When Last Crusade came around, it was 9 years after, well, about 8 years after the original film released, 9 or 10 years after the original film, Raiders had filmed the actual footage. It looked a little more dated, and because they went so much into Indy's backstory, I felt like it told too much. It took too much of the mystery away, and it focused a lot on his dad instead of on him being kind of out there on his own and doing his thing. And I didn't. It was my least favorite of the three original films. And again, I'm in the minority with that. However, when we went the other night, I really did enjoy it, and all the things that I had faulted the film for earlier in my life had changed. So I really enjoyed that film. I enjoyed it as much as the other two original films, and I thought it was really well done. You can definitely see, though, Harrison Ford definitely looks 9 or 10 years older in that film than he does in Raiders, and I didn't remember that as a kid. As a kid, I didn't see that change in him, but I definitely did, even though it's supposed to only be about 2 years after Raiders. This film is supposed to take place 2 years after Raiders of the Lost Ark. He definitely looks a little bit older. Still looks great in the part. Still does a great job with the part. That didn't bother me. But I was surprised about how it seemed less like rogue filmmaking and a little bit more polished than Raiders was. Raiders was a little more raw, and you haven't seen that yet. So when you see that, maybe you'll get that. Did you have? Obviously, I know you're going to tell me Indy was your favorite character because you said that before. Right. Did you like any of the other characters?
I liked the dad because he was really funny. And like in our intro, he went the other way.
That's Sean Connery, and Sean Connery was the original James Bond. And when George Lucas and Steven Spielberg were going to make Indiana Jones, this was partially because Spielberg always wanted to make a James Bond film, and he was never able to make a James Bond film. And George Lucas came to him and he said, I got something just like James Bond, but even better. And he started spewing out what the storyline would be and who the character was and everything else. And so the irony of this is that when they set out to find somebody to play Indy's dad, they decided, let's get James Bond in the best of them. So they brought in Sean Connery. They asked him to do it, and he agreed, and then they read and everything else. And you've never seen a James Bond film because they're not appropriate for you, in a few years maybe. But Sean Connery was very suave and sophisticated and never ever was in a situation where he was the butt of a joke, in the James Bond films. And he pulled out all the stops here and allowed himself to look silly at times and showed what a really, really great actor he actually is. He showed a lot of range in this, and I think he made people forget James Bond in a sense with his portrayal of this. His character roles in this and The Untouchables, basically, I think really set him apart from his James Bond character. I noticed you would laugh a lot when Salah was in there. He was the guy with the camels. He went and got the camels when he wasn't supposed to. They wanted to bring all the characters. He was in the original Raiders, but he wasn't in Temple of Doom. And Spielberg wanted to bring back the originals from the first film to kind of regroup that. What did you think about the girl in it, Elsa?
I thought she was really good playing the part. I did not expect her to be, I don't know if it's a spoiler, but I did not expect her to be a
villain. She turned out to be the villain, right?
Right.
A Nazi. Is that what you're going for? Yes. In the first film, Karen Allen plays the heroine, and she was like rough and tough, and she didn't really need saving. She would punch a guy, In the second film, the heroine was Willie Scott, and that was played by Kate Capshaw. And she was the traditional old school adventure heroine where she was always getting into trouble and needed Indy to bail her out. And this was a third take on the female lead for the series where this was a strong character, and you thought she was good. She turned out to be bad. She held her own. At the end, she kind of set up the villain. She sets up the villain. She did it on purpose so that the villain, she actually does away with the villain because of the choice she makes. So she turns back to the good at the end, although you know, and we don't want to give
Things
anything away.
happen.
Yes, things happen and what have you. So while we're there, though, talking about doing away with the villain, that was a part that would have bothered you. So I didn't let you watch that part because I knew that was going to be a little too intense. And the part with the rats, did that bother you?
Well, I would not have made it past there if I was Indiana, like his dad.
Right.
But I mean, it didn't really bother me, like scare me. I
No.
would be kind of like the girl, like, get off me, get off me.
Right, and in
It's
the movie
creepy."
theater, you were funny because you had your hands up over but your eyes were wide and you were watching it, but you're like, oh my goodness, it was one of those moments, but it didn't bother you. So, you know, there's a few intense moments in this, not as many as Raiders or Temple of Doom. Great film, great to see it on the big screen. I'm going to say for me it was a yummy. How about for you?
Yummy.
Right, and so, you know, if adventure has a name,
It must be Indiana Jones.
right.
Well, I
That
couldn't
one
say
was
it must
better.
be me.